When kids just won't listen, parents often feel stuck between two choices: to give in or get angry. It's exhausting. We give you the top techniques directly from the experts, helping you on your path to a more peaceful, respectful, and joyful life with your kids. All right, I am thrilled to introduce our guest today for a couple of reasons. One, she is our first international guest. And secondly, I just really enjoyed the conversation. Maybe having to do with the fact that she is a play therapist and my background as a child life specialist had a lot to do with play. Therapeutic play, we would call it. So we found plenty to agree on and speak the same language, which is always nice. Her name is Rachel Tomlinson. She's a registered psychologist in Australia. Rachel has experience working with adults and children in a variety of settings, including generalist counseling, play therapy, education settings, residential support, and attachment parenting groups. She presents at national conferences like Play Therapy and Trauma, Masculinity and Mental Health, and has also provided expert commentary to journalists on mental health topics. She has a brand new book coming out called Teaching Kids to Be Kind, and that is being released this month, January 2020. You can also find her work at a website called towardwellbeing.com. Toward, like Toward, wellbeing.com, where she shares her podcast, her blog, her books, her activities with kids, upcoming projects, and contributions to media. We want our children to be happy and healthy. We want them to feel loved and secure. But it's hard to know where to draw the line with a lot of things. Whether that's, how much play a kid really needs, or when they're just messing with you. So today we're going to talk about some of the basics of rules and consequences, of values and principles in the home or anywhere that you might encounter kids being kids. So talking about rules and consequences might not sound like it has much to do with play, but in this conversation, we're going to uncover exactly what it has to do with play and why that's so important. How it is that kids communicate through play, why they need it, when they need it, what's too much, and how ultimately we can communicate better with them, how we can get them to listen to us by understanding their need for play, their need for rules, and understanding how we can create an environment where those rules or values are tuned properly to best support that, without the adult getting overrun and without the child being stuck in a pen that they're not enjoying. We hear a lot about setting expectations before taking a kid into a new environment, but we don't always know what that looks like. Does that mean, having them read the handbook? How verbose, how numerous should the rules be? If they're too loose, then we feel like we're just waiting, we're just going after them all the time saying, hey, wait, you can't do that, you can't do that. But if they're too many, well, we all know what happens when any of us feel like we have too many rules to follow. So check it out, Rachel Tomlinson. I hope you enjoy. Rachel Tomlinson, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Excellent. Thanks for having me.
You're our first international guest, so I'm looking forward to learning how it's done on the other side of the world there. And I hope you're you're all safe from the events that are going on in Australia. You're having some fires out there.
Yes, luckily on the other side of the country. But thank you for asking, and thank you for having me.
Yeah. All right. Well, getting right into it, I always start the show with the same question, which is, what do you love most about working with kids?
I love their authenticity. It's sometimes the thing that makes us cringe the most about kids. They'll just say it how it is, but I actually think that it's so beautiful and so refreshing, and we lose that candor. We lose that spontaneity and that ability to just name things as we see them. I mean, obviously, we want to we want to give our kids, filters, and we want to give them the capacity to, wonder or consider whether that's, kind or necessary. But I just love it. I love hearing what they have to say. They're so creative and so imaginative, and it's just they have some really fascinating insights and ways of looking at the world. I just enjoy hearing what they have to say.
Yeah. Yeah. Very refreshing insights, isn't it?
Absolutely. And they think about things that adults wouldn't think about, or that, we're kind of conditioned not to look at or not consider, or, we're so buttoned up at times that we lose that spark and we lose that creativity. And I really love spending time with kids for that reason, getting to just hear what's going on in their little minds. And they've got the best authenticity detectors because of it. They know who's being authentic. They've got
Right.
they've got good detective skills in that way.
As a registered psychologist, what would you say is the main thing that you've learned from working with them?
I think that kids are more resilient than we give them credit for. Resilience is a wonderful thing, and sometimes it has to be employed in some of the most horrendous circumstances. But they are so resilient and so
Mm.
capable, and I think sometimes we forget that they're little people, and we don't give them enough
Yeah.
credit for their strength and their courage and their ability to adapt. I think that's the thing I've learned most from kids that I've worked with.
You work with kids who have dealt with some trauma. When I think of resiliency, sometimes I think of bouncing back from a trauma. How does that show up in just everyday kids, or does it?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's, the heartbreak when you don't win the running race, or, you're doing a colouring competition and your entry doesn't win a prize, or, your best friend wants to play with somebody else at recess. Every little day our kids, you know, um, have to show resilience and have to employ some kind of, strategy to get themselves through those little speed bumps of the day.
Do you think that that's something that adults hang on to? Is that something that we lose, or is it something that because we talked about authenticity and how that sometimes we kind of can turn that off a little bit as we learn the rules of what's supposed to say and what we're not supposed to say. Well, how about the resiliency? How does that change over time?
I think when we feel like we have to blend into certain social expectations, sometimes we can lose certain resiliences, if that's a word. So there's certain kind of social and cultural expectations about the way that we express our emotions, or the way that we talk about our problems, or share our issues. And without doing those kinds of things really openly and honestly and authentically, we lose that ability to be resilient in some ways, because we're not open with ourselves and not comfortable expressing and talking through the stuff that's bothering us. Whereas kids, they tell you, like, what's bothering your kids. But as they get older, they do shut themselves away. I'm speaking with parents of teenagers, the awkward car rides home or awkward dinners where you say, "Hey, how was your day?" And you get it,
Mm.
"Fine,
Right.
good." We lose that communication sometimes and that openness and trust. And it's not intentional, of course, but we can accidentally, shut that down with certain, social expectations or parent child dynamics at times as well.
Mm. Can you describe for us the environment that you're working in? What kind of kids are you seeing, and in what capacities are you working with them?
Primarily, my work has been in play therapy and with kids who have experienced trauma. So I've worked in the UK and Australia in residential homes for children, so children that can't live with their parents for a variety of different reasons. And also children that have experienced family and domestic violence or general counselling as well. I've also worked in education settings, so more educationally focused referrals as well, so kids that are struggling in the school setting. So a really big variety of kids, but I guess if I'd have to say a primary focus, it probably would have been trauma.
And can you give us a brief description of just what is play therapy?
Yeah, so children, well, I guess play is the primary way that children communicate. So before they have words, children have play. And it's a way of hearing what kids have to say through their play. So you can have a couple of different types of play therapy, but it's predominantly non directive. And that sounds a bit fancy, but
Mm.
it means allowing children to direct their own play and helping them to make sense of their internal world. So when children play, if they're allowed to play without rules or without restrictions, they play out the stuff that they know or that's been happening in their day because that's the only context they've got. They're not adults who've got like all of this other information and ideas. They're playing out the stuff that means something to them or that they're trying to make sense of. So you can make incredible progress and you can find out, really insightful things, or you can, really help and support a child in play therapy because it really helps you to hear what it is they genuinely want to tell you.
Mm. So you're not just throwing a ball with them.
Yeah.
From
No, I have thrown a ball, but
sure.
all of the toys are really specifically chosen to elicit particular types of play.
Mm.
So a child can then select the toy or toys or activity that is going to meet their needs. So that's what I meant about the non directive. So I would very rarely put out a pre organized activity. I might do. I have, particular like mindfulness activities or, you know, worksheets about learning about different emotions and things like that. That's directive play therapy. It's a bit different. What kind of borders on a bit of art therapy at times as well. But that non directive play therapy is allowing them to select particular toys. So none of the toys would be branded because that's a toy that's already got a
Mm.
predestined role or personality. So it doesn't allow them to kind of create or imprint their own. There's toys for kind of make believe, there's toys for nurturing, there's toys for reciprocity, so board games or kind of dual play and things like that.
It's interesting you said that play is how they communicate. And so I'm thinking, play is how they talk. And so play therapy for a child, could that be analogous to talk therapy for an adult?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, without being patronizing, I've often brought in play therapy strategies into adult sessions as
Uh-huh.
well
Okay.
for adults that have been having trouble expressing themselves. So we've done some more kind of, some different activities to unlock different thoughts or helping them to kind of communicate what's happening inside when they don't really have the words for it. Because our kids don't have the words yet. They don't have that same kind of dictionary or lexicon of words and phrases. So by watching and observing and, mirroring or reflecting what you're seeing, you're giving a child words about their internal experiences. It's really fascinating work.
So if the play that you're encouraging or fostering is non-directive, meaning that you're allowing the kids to choose the toy and direct the game or the play that they're engaging in, I'm imagining that there are lots of opportunities for them to push the boundaries, and especially you're dealing with kids. Yeah. So, what is a specific kind of challenge that you face in the playroom, and how do you handle it when a kid is going beyond the acceptable rules that you might have there?
Yeah, so generally I would start with a good setup. I try to put as minimal kind of rules in place, because otherwise you're just another adult with just another set of rules, and there's too many. So it was generally just, this is the playroom. You can play with any toy that you like. I'll let you know if there's anything that we can't do in this space, and it's just that. And, you're absolutely right. Working with children who've been traumatized, and if they're processing stuff, it can become quite, aggressive play. So trying to break toys or trying to hurt themselves or trying to hurt myself, probably not the kinds of things that you would see, in, every household, the level that it went to, but absolutely not really wanting to listen to kind of rules and boundaries and things like that. So for me, it's a very clear boundary needs to be laid out, and a consequence for not living within that boundary is really important too. So what I hear often is parents going, "You need to stop that, and I'm going to count to 3. 1, 2, 3."
Right.
Okay, they need to stop it, but what happens next? What if they don't stop it? What's going to happen? So kids often don't listen or find it really hard to exist within boundaries because it makes them feel out of control. And when they feel out of control, they get quite panicky, anxious, stressed, overwhelmed. And so you can get other behaviors that kind of come out instead. So it's about setting up some really clear and open expectations of, okay, so I'd like you to stop breaking the pencils. It's not okay to break them. Those pencils are for everybody. If you continue to break the pencils, we're going to have to finish our session today.
Hey.
And that would be a really clear example of play therapy. It's different when I say things as mum.
Sure.
I'm not going to stop play therapy sessions when I'm giving mum instructions. But it would be really similar. So, your kids at the shopping centre and they'd, want to have a go on one of those. I don't know if they have them in the US, but in Australia, we've got these like coin operated, I'm sure you do, coin operated toys in the shops, and they're littered everywhere.
Right,
and now they've got tap and go. So the kids just want to get on them and climb about and not leave.
We had those 15 years ago, but now kids aren't allowed to be playing in public anymore. So we had to get rid of all of those.
We've got them in shopping centres, and they've got like tap and go for your card. Like they've gotten really fancy. So you've got all these kids, their poor parents don't even have the excuse of, I've got no money. They're like, well, just tap your card. Like,
right.
tap the card, let's go. But, the example would be, come on now, it's time to leave. You need to get off the toy, and the kid doesn't want to. They're having such a great time.
Yeah.
And then you hear the parent getting frustrated and trying to drag them away, and empty threats of, well, I'm going to take your video game away, or that's it, no more donuts, or whatever. And it's just that really clear example of, okay, I understand that you really want to play on on that toy, but it's time to leave. And if you don't leave when I say, I'm going to have to, pick you up, and maybe we're going to have to leave, or, however it is that the parent decides to deal with conflict, but telling them what the consequence will be really clearly if they don't, um, you know, abide by the boundary that's being set.
Okay. So I'm thinking about as you were describing the play therapy room, and I'm wondering how a parent who's listening to this might hear an environment like that and hear that that's unusual, in that here's a place where you're saying that I'll let you know if you break a rule, and basically the space is open for the child to do what they want. And I'm wondering, is this something that is specific to a very unique environment where you're dealing with kids who've dealt with trauma, and you're a play therapist, and so you have this very special area? Or are there ways that can apply to the everyday person, a parent? That notion that the space is open and I'll let you know, as opposed to here's the handbook up front. Because we hear that a lot. We hear a lot of set the expectations up front, and I think people are interpreting that as
have a rule about everything. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. It is a quite specific play therapy technique, because what would happen is if a child is starting to break the toys, there's something in that as well. Like, of course, we don't want them to break the toys. Of course, we don't want them to hurt themselves or to hurt us. But there's something in that they are still expressing, that is still a genuine expression of what's happening inside. So it gives us opportunity to name it and then set a healthy boundary, or to redirect, or to give them another opportunity to have that need met, but in a more adaptive way, if that makes sense. So it is a particularly like play therapy technique, but at the same time, as a parent, you cannot have a rule about every single circumstance, because too many rules are just going to set your kids up to fail. Right. And when they fail, they don't feel like listening anymore, because, well, I've already made a mistake. I'm already in the bad books. They get that feeling of, I'm a bad kid, if there's so many rules that they're just not going to be able to adhere to. It's really good to have like core family rules, like honesty, or, openness, or, no lying, or no, like whatever. There's got to be some like core family. It's generally like family values or family morals, and that kind of dictates how you treat each other, which kind of expands to how we treat other people. And those are some really big expectations. And there's also, some, quite specific ones, like you hold my hand when we cross the road, or whatever. But if we get too strict and have, too many rules, we're not going to be able to apply them, A, to every situation, and B, we're going to overwhelm our kids, who aren't going to be able to remember them all, and are also probably not going to be able to adhere to them all the time either, because they're not perfect. That they don't have the same impulse control that adults do.
Right. So when you have a child who's pushed past the boundary, I heard you give a couple of approaches, saying kind of, I understand, but it is time to leave, and then outlining kind of the consequences. Is there more to it?
Yeah. It's generally naming, if you can see an emotion when you put the boundary in, that's also really important to bring in. So you generally, I would start with, so if we're going from like beginning to end of, that example, it would first of all be a warning. So I would always start with a warning. Don't just say, okay, it's time to leave. Like if we're going to use the same example of the, the fun toy or the fun game that the kid's playing with. Because, well, that's not particularly fair to the child. That they are going to be upset. We're setting ourselves up to fail. We're setting them up to fail. So it's giving a warning. Depending on the age of the child, it might depend, how long the warning is or how you count down, or it may be a pre-negotiated thing. Like talk about it with your kid in advance if they've got enough, if they're kind of, developmentally able to have that discussion with you. Like, okay, so, in the future, if we're going out and, you're enjoying something and it is time to leave, like how long do you think I should give you? Like how much warning before we need to pack up and go? If they've pre-negotiated it and they've had some say, there's going to be more buy-in. So if your child's old enough, that's a really great idea, that kind of pre-planning. But let's just say you haven't done the pre-planning. You're just at the shops or you're out at a friend's house or out in public somewhere, and it's time to go. Give them a warning and give a really clear time warning. Okay, so I can see you're having fun, playing with that game, but we've got 1 more minute, okay? I'm going to let you know when we've got 30 seconds left or 10 seconds left, whatever, the parent kind of feels appropriate to give their child a warning, and let them continue playing and then go, okay, 30 seconds left, and then go, okay, 30 seconds is up, it's time to leave. If the child resists, which they might do, even if they have been given a warning and they want to keep playing and they're not listening, it's really important to name that feeling, that frustration of, look, I can really see how frustrated you are. You were having so much fun with that toy and now it's time to leave. I can see you're really disappointed, or I can see you're really frustrated or cross about that. Name the feeling. That immediately reduces that emotional intensity because you're helping them to make sense of why this is so hard. They might still, even beyond those 2 lovely techniques, they might still be really struggling because they really wanted to play with that toy and they really did not want to leave. They weren't ready. So at that point, it's time to put in the boundary. Okay, well, as I said, you had 1 more minute. You agreed to 1 more minute. However, it is now time to leave. If you don't leave with me, then X, Y, and Z. And it's got to be, and I'm not going to say what I think repercussion or anything might be, because that's very unique to different families about what kind of consequences they put in place. Definitely not any kind of corporal punishment or anything like that is definitely something I'm not going to agree with. But, it could be, we're going to leave right now, or I'll pick my daughter up if I need to and really gently just leave the situation. Some families might, talk about, not being able to play with something later. Look, I don't know, I won't make any assumptions, but, put in a consequence of, what will happen if they aren't able to leave, and then follow through with it. But make it something believable, not like you're going to be grounded forever or Santa's going to burn all the presents or whatever. Like, please not something that's not going to follow
leave you
through
here.
because
I'm going to leave you at the playground and see you tomorrow.
Yeah, goodbye. You'll never see me again. Yeah. Exactly.
Not nice.
It's got to be genuine, and it's also got to be like age appropriate, and it's got to be like in relation to the severity of what they're doing. They want to play on the playground for a bit longer. Well, look, that's probably not the most terrible things in when we're talking about challenging behaviours, but it's got to be something that suits the behaviour that the child's expressing as well.
I've heard you talk a couple times about kind of empty threats and the importance of being genuine when you're laying out a consequence or a boundary. And I'm wondering, if people are hearing, well, I do want to shock the kid a little bit. I really want them to to go right now. And so the acting as if Christmas isn't going to happen this year or something, one of those other situations, that will really get them to do what I want. What's the importance of that kind of genuine approach, and what's the advantage of that?
Because you can follow through with it. And if you follow through with it and you consistently set boundaries that you adhere to and that you expect your child to adhere to, it actually fosters a sense of safety and security. And it sounds strange because kids don't necessarily like boundaries, but they love boundaries, if that makes sense. They need boundaries. When you put a boundary in place and you have clear expectations of your children, it makes them feel safe because they know what to expect from you. If you say you're going to do A, B, and C, they know it means A, B, and C and not X, Y, and Z. It's not weird algebra for kids. They know that what you say is what you mean. They know that you will follow through, and it gives them a sense of safety and security. It also helps them to feel more confident and higher self-esteem because they know what you want from them and they know how to achieve it, so they can feel good about themselves, that they know how to meet your expectations. And when your child is feeling safe and secure and they've got clear expectations, they're more likely in the future to follow through. So you might get the response to, hey, I'm going to leave you at the playground and never see me again, or Santa's going to burn down the Christmas tree. You might get that immediate reaction, but it's that long-term stuff that you're actually really wanting. You don't want that quick fear response. A fear response is not teaching them to want to be in those boundaries or to understand those boundaries. They're responding to fear. If there's those big kind of like emotional, I don't want to say threat because it sounds too strong of a word, but I'm going to use it because it's nearly 10 o'clock at night. So I can't think of a better word.
Sure. Well, I see it all the time. I see here in the States, at least, it's don't do that or I'm going to whoop you. And it's like, open threats, of physical, punishment. And you never know if that ever really happens in that family, because, they might not do it in public or whatever, but it's common.
And the child's not learning anything. They're not learning what it feels like to be safe and secure. They're not learning how to respond to other people's expectations and rules. They're responding to fear. And they might become compliant because of the fear, but they're not necessarily learning about safe and appropriate boundaries and rules.
So you're saying that the reason it's important is for the child's learning and kind of the long-term relationship that you want to have, where they know that you mean what you say and that they can count on you doing that makes them feel safe, and it's going to lead to them hopefully listening more in the future.
Absolutely. So not only is your relationship with them safe because they know what to expect from you, but they also feel that sense of pride within themselves for knowing that they know how to meet your expectations. Kids, as I said before, kids don't necessarily like rules, but they need them, and it actually helps them to feel more loved and more secure when you put appropriate. It's got to be appropriate. So, developmentally appropriate, age appropriate, family and culturally appropriate rules and expectations in place. Like, all of those things have to come into it. There can't be too many, like we spoke about before, but with the right number of clear expectations, it really helps kids to flourish, and it helps them to function in other places where they need to follow rules or there are expectations and boundaries, like school.
Yeah. I'm going to try to summarize what I'm hearing from you.
Sure.
And let me know where I go off. So you started with this idea that that a family or an environment should limit the amount of kind of rules that they have. And you talked about kind of family values. I've often talked about principles in a family, honesty being one,
Yeah.
no lying, no stealing, and minimizing those rules, or values or principles to. I mean, you've got them there in just a couple words.
Yeah.
And so from that, it's kind of like, here's the basics. Every situation's different, but I'll let you know when you've gone outside of one of these rules, and then we can talk about that.
Absolutely. And there's a couple of key safety ones as well that, depending on the age of the child, there will be different safety expectations. Like as kids get older, okay, well, you need to tell me what friend you're going out with, or, you need to ring me by this time, or you need to be home by this time, whereas with younger kids, it might be hold my hand in the car park, or no, you can't ride to the shops by yourself, or whatever it is. There might be certain safety ones that come into play as well. But I get why parents want so many rules, but
you want to cover all their bases.
Yeah, I get it. I really, really do. But it just ends up being too many, and kids, they can't remember them. I read some statistics, and I'm gonna butcher my own conversation because I can't remember what they are. But it was the sheer number of times that you have to repeat a rule or instruction for a young child to actually take that in and get it, really, really get it and understand where it comes from and what they have to do and how they make sense of that. And it's a lot. That repetition. So if you've just got lots and lots of rules about everything, they might be disobeying, but not intentionally, just because they can't take that many things in and remember that many things in their short-term memory.
Right.
So yes.
And then you were saying in a situation where the kid's not listening, you're asking them to do something and they're not going along with it, that it's important to give a warning and specifically not just here's the warning and now it's time, but I heard that you were kind of incorporating a little bit of negotiation or a little bit of preparedness in talking about when we're leaving the playground before we get to the playground, talking about how long you can be on the ride ahead of time, or setting that timer. I know that kids love playing with cell phones, and a big trick that I've always used is, hey, you can set the timer, on the phone. And it's like when they're punching in the numbers, how much more that sinks in with them, that it's like, oh, okay, a minute 35 seconds,
Yes.
And
that's a really great one. If you can create buy-in with kids by involving them in the parameters of stuff. So it could be family rules, or it could be consequences. They actually really they do amazingly well, and because they've got buy-in, they have more understanding and more kind of connection or engagement and understanding of the rule. It's not just arbitrary that you've decided that this is happening. And quite often we get really sort of strong and intense behaviors from our kids when they don't feel in control, they feel powerless. So we do get, tantrums, or we do get escalations or overwhelmed kids. So at any point where you can involve them in that decision making, do it. As I said, there's always safety things that are we just cannot do that. That's just not something we do. So, if your kid's just about to step out in front of a car, it's not time to, give them a warning and, okay, in 30 seconds, I need you to, not step in front of that car.
Right.
It's not that. It's when you can, involve them, in that discussion, it's going to create a much better buy-in. Like you would really think in particular for consequences that kids wouldn't buy into that. But I remember working with a family, it was quite interesting. We talked about, involving them in the consequences because the young boy wasn't listening particularly well, and mum was really at her wit's end, and we sort of talked about some strategies and sat down and we were like, okay, well, let's nut it out together. Let's do a brainstorm. Kids love brainstorms and writing on whiteboards. So we got to write on the whiteboard. It was brilliant. And he was having the best time, and we were talking about, okay, so what are the expectations of this family and what do you expect from each other, and what happens if you don't meet that? Like, what happens next? And we gave a couple of examples that he'd particularly been struggling with, and we're like, what do you think needs to happen if you're not able to do this? And you would think that he would say something like, oh, I get lollies, or like if he's getting a say, like you think it's going to be silly, like, or nothing will happen, or I don't get to watch TV for 1 minute or something. But he was actually like, you get to throw my Xbox in the bin. And his mum was like, oh no. Like he was, he went the complete opposite end. Like he was actually really involved in like the consequences and what he thought needed to happen, and we like dialed it down. Like he didn't need to throw out his Xbox. But it was just really interesting, like that they do really get involved and really like to play a part in that. And it makes more sense to them then if you do have to put a consequence in. It's not just this arbitrary decision that someone else has made. They understand why it's happening, so you're less likely to see it again in the future. So this is all like future-proofing stuff, but the first time you try this, it might not have the most magical kind of outcomes, but it's like setting the groundwork and being consistent and pre-planning these conversations when you're not at the playground. And trying to kind of prepare as much as possible so that when a time does come, your child has a really clear understanding of what you expect.
So after you've given the warning, after you've set the rules, if things still aren't going your way, you talked about the importance of naming or validating the experience of the child by saying something like, I can see that this is really hard for you, that you really wanted to stay and play, and now you're frustrated that, or sad that it's time to go so soon.
Yeah.
And by doing that, you're kind of giving them the words and the explanation that they may need to describe in their own mind and understand why they're so upset. Because especially with the younger kids, they're just bundles of emotion, and they don't always know why they're crying. And so by naming that, they're kind of able to to learn over time, this is what this means, this is when this happens, and kind of identify their inner world just the same as you would identify this is a bicycle.
Yeah, exactly. And it also immediately diffuses things as well. Like, I don't know if you've ever had someone go, that sounds like that was so tough, like that must have been really frustrating for you. You're just like, yeah, it was. And it's just like immediately gratifying that someone understood you. It might simultaneously, in the case of parents and children, might be the person who's, done the thing that's made you, feel frustrated. But to feel heard in that way and to feel acknowledged in that way immediately diffuses a lot of tension and frustration. And it stops these kinds of things from being a rupture in the relationship between parent and child, because it can easily turn into like a slanging match, and your temper's afraid, and you've gotten cross, and the kid's gotten cross, everyone's gotten cross, and then it's a rupture. Like just a small one, but it's still a rupture. Whereas if you can give that to them, like, I still see you and I see what you're feeling and I still respect that and I get that, it stops in most cases that rupture from happening, and it can that immediately diffuse and support your kid in that moment. So the behavior might, de-escalate simply because they've been heard. It's quite a profound kind of little technique at times.
Yeah, I think those first two steps will help in any conflict. I mean, kind of pre-planning the conversation, or going in with some warning, if you will. Um, if you're arguing with your partner,
Yeah.
you know, rather than just jumping on them with the thing that your demand is, and then recognizing their feeling afterward. That's useful in most areas, isn't it?
Indeed, indeed.
Yeah. And then finally, when it is time to kind of set or have the boundary, or you know enact the consequence, you talked about the importance of just being clear about it, um, and not having an empty threat, but being the type of person who's going to follow through with something that's appropriate, um, and that will actually build trust. And you talked about it being something that they love, even if they don't like it.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, they're definitely not going to like it at the time, just disclaimer.
Sure.
But it's that overall, when your parent or another person in your life says something to you that you trust, that what they're saying, you take it at face value and you trust what they're saying. And for our little kids, especially with their parents are their primary caregiver. This is the person who they need to trust the most in the world, who gives them a sense of safety and security. And they need to know that their parent, is safe, and that they are putting in those boundaries. So they don't necessarily like them, but actually boundaries are so good for kids' mental health and general well-being. As long as you said quite rightly though, as long as the boundaries and the consequences, both of them, are age and developmentally appropriate, and that the consequence is, in line with, the punishment fits the crime, as it were, then
Right.
yeah, absolutely, it's a really good boundary then.
So, understanding what is age and developmentally appropriate, besides consulting your own book, which is coming out this month, what are some other resources that you would recommend to parents or anyone working with children?
I absolutely love, she's an Australian parenting expert called Maggie Dent, Dent. She is just an absolute guru, and she breaks down parenting concerns like really, really easily, and just she makes so much sense, and she has so many kind of practical ideas. Um, there's also another, look, I'm Australian, so my resources are Australian, and
Sure.
another parenting expert, Dr. Justin Coulson, Coulson, and he does some amazing work, and the way that he works is really compassionately and genuinely, and he's got a lot of kind of science and rigor behind the work that he does. He's got some great parenting books, and he's got some great podcasts and resources, and his stuff is all about creating that connection with your kids and all the other stuff that then falls in place once you've got that great relationship. So he's pretty wonderful as well. And there's also another really great parenting resource called Circle of Security. I don't know if that's something that's available worldwide or potentially just in Australia, but it's this really beautiful model about how to be a safe anchor for your children, allow them to sort of, if you imagine a circle, allow them to kind of leave your safe and secure embrace, explore the world, and then return at a point where they need that comfort again. And it's a really great reminder that, the relationship is often one of the ways that we get our kids to listen is by creating that trust and creating that security and that confidence in us and in that relationship. So, yeah, those are probably the top three that I send people
Great.
to immediately.
Yeah. And you have a book coming
I
out
do have a book coming out.
this month.
Yes.
And the title is Teaching Kids to Be Kind. Is that right?
Yes, yes. It's
All right. Tell us about it.
it's a beautiful little book. I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but
Oh, go ahead.
self-effacing. It really focuses on what are the things that we can be doing every day to be encouraging our kids to be kind. So the chapters are broken down into kind of a couple of major headings like walking the walk and talking the talk and emotional regulation. So a couple of really key kind of things that we need to be putting in place in the home. And then each chapter has a very, very large number of practical tips that you can follow every day. So there's 365 tips. So you could try one tip a day, to be encouraging your kids to learn about kindness and compassion. And each of the tips are broken down into like the subheadings of each of the chapters. So like in, for example, like talking the talk, so how do we, use language, to help our kids be kind. So not gossiping, or, the not telling, off-color jokes or, inappropriate jokes, with discriminatory language or things like that. But it's got some really, really practical tips as well about the language that we can use and foster in kids. That's just for that particular chapter. But lots and lots of activities as well that you can do with your kids and activities that families can do in their community as well to be really pushing that message of kindness and compassion.
And so this isn't a book that's geared necessarily to the population of people that you're seeing in your practice, but it's for any parent. Is there a specific age range?
No, I probably wouldn't say for infants, but most of the tips can be adapted developmentally. So it might have a little tweak in there or a little disclaimer about how you might be able to apply, a different tip to older or younger children. But I would generally say sort of from toddler right up to early adolescence. And it's for every parent as well as caregivers. I've done some work with educators and so early childhood and primary educators and other clinical workers as well about being able to use some of the tips in counselling work or support work or other different ways. So yeah, anyone that works with or looks after children.
Great. You've definitely made things so clear here that even without reading the book, I can assume that it's not full of complex language that
No.
only other psychologists would be able to grasp.
No. It's definitely very similar, as if I would be just having this conversation with you, is pretty much how the book sounds.
That's great.
There's a couple of little interesting bits of science, but those are dot points or sidebars. It's really it's got examples as well. So examples from my work to help people to really paint a picture of, how those strategies can be applied or what particular behaviours might look like and how they can be really challenging, but also how we can support our kids to get past them as families and parents. And I always think that really open and clear communication and messaging is where we need to go. Like science is lovely and it backs up everything that I do, but people need to actually be able to understand it and make sense of it in their world. So it's always lots of examples and always lots of practical tips.
Okay. We will put links to everything that you've talked about. Where can we learn more about you? And do you have any kind of upcoming things you'd like to plug or share with the audience besides your book, of course?
I have my website, Toward Wellbeing, so www.towardwellbeing.com. I also have an Instagram page at Toward Wellbeing, and I have something in the pipeline that I'm probably not allowed to mention just yet, but it is
secret project.
Secret project. It's another publishing project. So I have more exciting things. I'm waving my hands around in the air to a room that no one's looking at me in, but yeah, jazz hands.
I think so. Well, you'll be welcome back to talk about that whenever you're ready.
Perfect.
It's been great talking with you. Do you have any parting thoughts, anything that you wish that we had talked about that we didn't cover?
No, there was some really, really great questions, and I really like being able to summarize it in a way that's meaningful. I think the only other thing that I kind of didn't mention that's really important is getting down onto your kids' level and looking at them when you're talking to them, and just remembering that, being a big, tall adult is imposing, and maybe using a cross voice is also really imposing. That's not gonna help things. I know that you might feel like you're being heard when you raise your voice or if you speak loudly, but getting down and looking your child in the eye and speaking softly and having a soft face, like soft nonverbals as well, it's surprising just how much they really pay attention. And that's really just going to support your message as well of, creating that strong, safe relationship to, set yourselves up for future challenges. So that was probably the only thing that I didn't quite touch on that's really important in all of those steps.
Yeah, I hear that kind of falling in line with some of the other stuff of, we do have all the power in the relationship, and finding ways to soften that is going to be more effective over time than here's a million rules, I'm going to yell at you when you break them.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be towering over you the whole time.
Yeah, that's scary stuff for a little person. And you're right about that power differential between an adult and a child. And, it kind of has to be that way because we are the parent and they are the child. And sometimes we say things that just have to go, like this is just the way it is. But if we can get them to feel more involved and more equal and more empowered, for them to be empowered, it doesn't mean that we lose power or that they're taking it from us, but for them to feel empowered, they're going to feel happier and safer and more connected and more likely to want to listen as well. So it's all that set up stuff that might help you in the moment as well, but it's also that consistent setup over time is really going to help.
That's great. Well, I know it's very late there, so we're going to let you get to bed.
Thank you.
Rachel, thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you. It's been really lovely.
Everyone out there listening, thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next time. Goodbye.